Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when carrying new life meant carrying death close beside you. We whisper the stories of women whose names history has mostly forgotten, women who faced the greatest mystery of all, bringing forth life with nothing but herbs gathered at midnight, prayers murmured in Latin they barely understood, and the trembling hope that dawn would find them still breathing. A world where pregnancy was not a condition to be managed by medicine, but a covenant made with fate itself, where every flutter of new life within the womb was both blessing and warning, where mothers-to-be walked a razor's edge between miracle and catastrophe, guided only by the accumulated whispers of grandmothers, the dubious wisdom of village wise women, and the distant sterile pronouncements of monks who had never held a laboring woman's hand. We step into their world tonight. We feel the weight of woolen skirts, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and uncertainty. We taste the bitter herbs brewed in earthenware pots by firelight. We hear the quiet prayers that rose like incense from birthing chambers where joy and sorrow dwelt as neighbors, separated only by the thickness of a breath. This is the story of endurance, of women who carried the future of their bloodlines beneath hearts that beat with equal measures of hope and terror, of pregnancy as a pilgrimage, a journey into the unknown, where every step forward might be the last, but where stopping was never an option. So settle deeper into this moment. Let the centuries fall away like autumn leaves. Tonight, we remember what it meant to create life when life itself hung by threads as delicate as spider silk in morning dew.
Before we begin this journey together, if you find solace in these quiet wanderings through time, if these whispered histories bring you peace, then please consider subscribing to our little corner of the internet. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? What distant place calls you home as we travel together into the past? Now, dim the lights around you. Draw the covers close. Let your breathing slow and deepen like the rhythm of centuries passing. Feel yourself settling into the soft embrace of story and time. Tonight, we become witnesses to the quiet courage of women who lived and loved and hoped in a world so different from our own, yet connected to us by the endless thread of human experience. Close your eyes if you wish. Let my voice become the wind through medieval halls, carrying the scents of rushes and herbs, the distant sound of spinning wheels, the soft murmur of prayers in languages we barely remember.
In the year of our Lord, 1300 and something, for time moved differently then, measured not in precise moments, but in seasons and sorrows and small joys, a young woman named Marguerite feels the first flutter of life within her belly. She is perhaps 17, though birthdays are luxuries for the wealthy, and she measures her years instead by harvests survived, winters endured, summers when the crops did not fail. She places her hand over the gentle swell beneath her kirtle, that simple woolen dress that will expand with her growing burden over the months to come. The fabric is rough against her palm, woven by her own mother's hands from wool sheared from sheep she helped tend as a child. Everything in her world carries this weight of continuity, this sense that life moves in circles rather than lines. But this flutter beneath her palm, this is different. This is the beginning of the longest, most perilous journey she will ever take, and she knows it. For in this world of ours, 7 centuries past, pregnancy is not a condition to be celebrated with revealing parties and carefully documented milestones.
It is a sentence pronounced by God or fate or the mysterious workings of bodies that belong more to husbands and the church than to the women who inhabit them. It is a 9-month walk through a valley where shadows grow longer with each passing day. Marguerite knows the stories. Every woman knows them. They are passed down like heirloom rosaries, each bead a different tragedy, a different warning. There was Alicia, the blacksmith's wife, who died when the baby came sideways and would not turn. There was young Mary, for they called her that even after she had borne 3 children, who simply bled and bled until the red tide carried her away from her sobbing husband and motherless babes.
And then there are the other stories, the ones whispered in even quieter tones. The babies born too early, blue and still as winter mornings. The infants who drew breath for a day, a week, a month, then simply stopped. As if they had looked upon this world and found it wanting. As if they had touched the edge of life and decided the darkness was kinder. In our time, we speak of maternal mortality rates, of statistics and percentages. But statistics are abstractions, numbers floating in the clean air of academia. For Marguerite, the danger is as concrete as the stone floor beneath her feet, as real as the blood that flows monthly from her body, when it flows at all. For now it will cease, pooling instead in the secret chambers of her womb to nourish this growing spark of possibility. She has heard that 1 woman in 3 will not survive the bearing of many children, but even this number fails to capture the full weight of her burden. For it is not simply death that stalks pregnant women in these times. It is suffering in forms we can barely imagine from our modern vantage point of epidurals in emergency surgery, of prenatal vitamins and genetic counseling. There is the sickness that comes with the early months, not the mere queasiness that modern women endure, but a retching that can last for hours, leaving her weak and shaking, unable to keep down even the thin gruel that serves as breakfast. And there is no understanding of why this happens, no knowledge of hormones or changing chemistry. It is simply another mystery of the female body, another cross to bear in a world already heavy with suffering. The wise women of the village will tell her to chew ginger root if she can find it, though ginger is costly and rare, brought by merchants from lands so distant they might as well be mythical. They will suggest nibbling bread before rising, or drinking warm ale with herbs whose names she cannot pronounce. Some remedies will help a little. Others will make things worse. None come with guarantees or scientific backing. They are simply hope dressed in the garb of tradition.
And then there are the cravings that will come, strange hungers for things that should not be eaten. Clay from the riverbank, charcoal from the hearth, the bark of certain trees. Her body will demand these things with an urgency that feels almost like madness, and she will not know that what she craves is iron, calcium, nutrients that her growing child steals from her bones and blood. She will grow pale and thin, even as her belly swells. Her teeth will loosen in her gums, for the child takes what it needs, and what it needs comes from the mother's own body, leaving her diminished, depleted. For every child a tooth, the old women say, and it is not merely a saying, but a truth written in the bone. But tonight, in this moment, Marguerite simply stands with her hand pressed to her belly, feeling that first small quickening, and tries to imagine a future where she holds a living child in her arms instead of mourning another small grave in the churchyard. It is a future as fragile as morning mist, as uncertain as tomorrow's weather, but it is the only future she has. The fire in the hearth burns low, casting dancing shadows on the walls of her small cottage. Outside, the wind carries the scent of approaching winter, the promise of months when warmth will be scarce and food scarcer.
She will grow large and awkward during the darkest time of year, when every breath of air burns cold in her lungs, and every step requires careful consideration of icy ground and treacherous paths. She does not yet know that she will spend many nights lying awake, feeling the child move within her like a fish swimming in deep waters, wondering if this restlessness is normal or if it signals some terrible complication. She does not know that she will count every flutter, every kick, learning to read the language of movement as if her life depends on it, because it does. For now, she simply holds this secret knowledge like a candle flame cupped in her palms, protecting it from the wind of worry and fear that threatens to blow it out. Tomorrow, she will tell her husband. Next week, perhaps, she will whisper the news to her mother. But tonight, the secret belongs only to her and to the tiny spark of life that has chosen her body as its first home. The moon, visible through the small window of her cottage, is waning toward darkness. In less than 9 lunar cycles, if God wills it, if fate permits it, if her body proves strong enough and her luck holds, she will hold her child. Between now and then stretches a chasm of uncertainty that she must cross one day at a time, one breath at a time, carrying within herself both the future and the ever-present possibility of loss.
This was where every pregnancy began in the medieval world. Not with joy and celebration, but with this quiet acknowledgement of the enormity of the journey ahead. Not with certainty, but with hope. Not with knowledge, but with faith that the same mysterious forces that had brought life into being might also see it safely through to the other side of birth. As autumn deepens into winter, and Marguerite's secret can no longer be hidden beneath the folds of her woolen dress, she begins to understand that pregnancy is not merely a condition of the body, but a transformation of her entire existence. Her world contracts around the growing demands of the life within her, each day bringing new discomforts, new fears, new reminders of how little control she has over her own flesh. The morning sickness has evolved into something more complex, waves of nausea that strike without warning, often triggered by smells that once brought comfort. The smoke from the hearth now makes her retch. The scent of meat cooking sends her stumbling outside to heave into the frozen garden. Even the smell of her husband's skin after a long day of labor becomes unbearable, forcing her to sleep on the far edge of their straw mattress, curled into herself like a wounded animal. She learns to eat in small, careful portions, a few spoonfuls of thin porridge, a crust of bread, nibbled slowly. The rich stews and hearty fare that sustain working people through harsh winters become impossible to stomach. She grows thinner even as her belly rounds, her face pale and drawn, while her body works the miracle of creating new life from her own substance. There is no understanding in this time of the complex chemistry at work within her, no knowledge of how the growing child's demands strip calcium from her bones, iron from her blood, nutrients from every corner of her being. The wise women speak of the baby eating the mother from within, and while their language is crude, their observation is startlingly accurate. Pregnancy in the medieval world is literally a consumption, the child consuming the mother's body to build its own.
Her hair, once thick and lustrous, begins to thin and lose its shine. Her nails become brittle, splitting at the slightest pressure. Her skin takes on a waxy pallor that no amount of washing can brighten. These changes are accepted as natural, inevitable parts of childbearing. "You're glowing," people say when they mean you look different, and perhaps that glow is simply the light of life being slowly drained from the mother to nourish the child. but the physical discomforts are only part of her burden. As her belly grows rounder and more prominent, Marguerite discovers that pregnancy has transformed her from a person into a symbol, a walking representation of female function that everyone feels entitled to comment upon, touch, and interpret according to their own understanding of women's bodies and women's roles. The village wise woman, old Catherine, arrives uninvited one morning to examine her condition. She places her gnarled hands on Marguerite's belly, pressing and prodding with the authority of someone who has attended dozens of birthings and seen every possible outcome. Her touch is not gentle. There is no concept of bedside manner in this world where survival trumps comfort every time. "The baby sits low," Catherine announces, as if reading prophecy in the curve of Marguerite's abdomen. "Low means boy. High means girl. Low means easier birth. High means—" She shrugs, leaving the implications hanging in the air like wood smoke. These pronouncements, delivered with the certainty of Holy Writ, will follow Marguerite through the remaining months of her pregnancy. The shape of her belly, the way she carries the weight, the color of her complexion, the pattern of her cravings, all become tea leaves to be read by anyone who considers themselves an expert in the mysteries of childbearing. If she craves sweet things, it's a girl. If she wants meat and salt, a boy. If her face breaks out in spots, the baby is stealing her beauty, certainly a daughter. If she seems to glow with health, the child is strong and will be born easily. If she looks peaked and wan, difficult times lie ahead. Every old woman in the village has her own system of interpretation, her own collection of signs' importance, and none of them agree with any of the others.
The superstitions multiply like mushrooms in damp soil. She must not look at the full moon, lest her child be born a lunatic. She must not step over ropes or chains, lest the umbilical cord wrap around the baby's neck. She must not raise her arms above her head, lest the cord become tangled. She must avoid certain foods, certain animals, certain types of weather. The list of prohibitions grows longer each week, until simply existing becomes a careful navigation through a maze of potential disasters. And through it all, her body continues its relentless transformation. By the 6th month, she can no longer see her own feet when she looks down. Her back aches constantly from the weight she carries in front, and there is no relief to be found in any position. Lying flat becomes impossible as the baby presses against her lungs, making breath shallow and difficult. Sitting requires careful arrangement of cushions and supports. Standing for long periods leaves her dizzy and faint. The simple acts of daily life become monumental challenges. Drawing water from the well requires multiple trips with smaller buckets. Bending to tend the fire leaves her gasping and weak. Even climbing the ladder to the sleeping loft becomes treacherous as her center of gravity shifts and her balance becomes uncertain. Her husband, William, tries to be helpful in his awkward masculine way. He takes over the heavier tasks without being asked, splits extra wood for the fire, brings her small gifts from the market, a piece of honeycomb, a bit of colored ribbon, a small mirror made of polished metal. But he also grows distant as her body changes, uncertain how to relate to this swollen, uncomfortable creature who has replaced the woman he married. Their physical intimacy becomes complicated, then impossible. The Church teaches that pregnancy is a time of purity, when the woman's body is devoted entirely to the holy work of creation. Sexual relations during pregnancy are not just unseemly, but potentially dangerous, likely to harm the developing child or mark it in some way. William accepts this teaching with the relief of a man who finds his wife's changing body more alarming than attractive.
So Marguerite grows increasingly isolated within her own skin, carrying her burden alone, even when surrounded by people.
The other women in the village watch her with a complex mixture of sympathy and dread that all women feel when confronted with pregnancy in an age when it might as easily mean death as new life. They offer advice and assistance, but always with the unspoken awareness that they might be watching her walk toward her own grave. The winter deepens, and with it Marguerite's sense of vulnerability. Cold air burns her lungs and makes breathing even more difficult. Ice on the paths becomes not just inconvenient, but potentially catastrophic. A fall could mean the end of everything. She moves more and more slowly, more and more carefully, each step calculated and deliberate. At night, lying in the darkness beside her sleeping husband, she feels the baby move within her like something alive and separate, something with its own will and agenda. Sometimes the movements are gentle, barely perceptible flutterings that remind her of butterflies or small birds. Other times they are violent kicks and punches that leave her bruised from the inside. She learns to read these movements like a language, interpreting each shift and roll for signs of the baby's health and position. Active movement means the child is strong. Long periods of stillness send her into panic, pressing her hands against her belly and jostling herself to provoke a response. She becomes intimately acquainted with her own anatomy in ways that would have been impossible before pregnancy, feeling the hard curve of a tiny spine through her skin, the sharp jab of an elbow or knee, the strange rolling sensation when the baby changes position. But for all this intimate knowledge of her condition, she remains fundamentally ignorant of the process she is undergoing. She does not know that the baby's position will determine the ease or difficulty of birth. She does not understand the role of the placenta or the dangers of its premature separation. She has no concept of blood pressure or the risks of toxemia. Her pregnancy unfolds in a fog of uncertainty, guided only by folk wisdom and the accumulated experience of women who themselves understood very little of what was happening to their bodies.
So Marguerite grows increasingly isolated within her own skin, carrying her burden alone, even when surrounded by people. The other women in the village watch her with a complex mixture of sympathy and dread that all women feel when confronted with pregnancy in an age when it might as easily mean death as new life. They offer advice and assistance, but always with the unspoken awareness that they might be watching her walk toward her own grave. The winter deepens, and with it Marguerite's sense of vulnerability. Cold air burns her lungs and makes breathing even more difficult. Ice on the paths becomes not just inconvenient, but potentially catastrophic. A fall could mean the end of everything. She moves more and more slowly, more and more carefully, each step calculated and deliberate. At night, lying in the darkness beside her sleeping husband, she feels the baby move within her like something alive and separate, something with its own will and agenda. Sometimes the movements are gentle, barely perceptible flutterings that remind her of butterflies or small birds. Other times they are violent kicks and punches that leave her bruised from the inside. She learns to read these movements like a language, interpreting each shift and roll for signs of the baby's health and position. Active movement means the child is strong. Long periods of stillness send her into panic, pressing her hands against her belly and jostling herself to provoke a response. She becomes intimately acquainted with her own anatomy in ways that would have been impossible before pregnancy, feeling the hard curve of a tiny spine through her skin, the sharp jab of an elbow or knee, the strange rolling sensation when the baby changes position. But for all this intimate knowledge of her condition, she remains fundamentally ignorant of the process she is undergoing. She does not know that the baby's position will determine the ease or difficulty of birth. She does not understand the role of the placenta or the dangers of its premature separation. She has no concept of blood pressure or the risks of toxemia. Her pregnancy unfolds in a fog of uncertainty, guided only by folk wisdom and the accumulated experience of women who themselves understood very little of what was happening to their bodies.
This dropping, Catherine explains, is a sign that birth approaches. The baby has settled lower in the womb, pressing down on organs and bones in new and uncomfortable ways. Marguerite's breathing becomes easier as the pressure on her lungs lessens, but walking becomes even more difficult as the child's head engages with her pelvis. She waddles now like a duck, her gait wide and ungainly, her hands pressed to her lower back in a futile attempt to ease the constant ache. The remedies begin in earnest now. Catherine brews teas from raspberry leaves, claiming they will strengthen the womb for labor. The tea tastes of grass and bitterness, but Marguerite drinks it dutifully, grateful for any action she can take to influence her fate. She chews fennel seeds to ease digestion and prevent the nausea that still strikes without warning. She rubs oil infused with lavender on her stretched belly, hoping to prevent the red marks that scar so many women after childbirth. But for every remedy that might help, there are a dozen more that are useless or even dangerous. Catherine brings powdered unicorn horn, actually ground narwhal tusk, though no one in the village knows this, that supposedly strengthens women in labor. She mixes potions containing mercury and lead, believing these heavy metals will balance the humors and ensure an easy birth. She burns strange resins and makes Marguerite breathe the smoke, convinced that certain scents can influence the baby's position in the womb. The other village women contribute their own knowledge to this growing collection of birthing lore. Agnes the baker brings bread baked with special herbs that supposedly prevent excessive bleeding. Mary from the mill shares a poultice made from spider webs and egg whites that she swears will heal any tears in the birth passage. Even the younger women, those who have not yet borne children themselves, offer advice gleaned from watching their mothers and sisters navigate pregnancy and birth. Some of this accumulated wisdom is genuinely helpful. The women understand, through generations of observation, that certain positions make labor easier. They know that walking can help a slow birth progress, and that massage can ease some of the pain. They have learned which herbs genuinely help with bleeding, and which can stimulate contractions when labor stalls. This dropping, Catherine explains, is a sign that birth approaches. The baby has settled lower in the womb, pressing down on organs and bones in new and uncomfortable ways. Marguerite's breathing becomes easier as the pressure on her lungs lessens, but walking becomes even more difficult as the child's head engages with her pelvis. She waddles now like a duck, her gait wide and ungainly, her hands pressed to her lower back in a futile attempt to ease the constant ache. The remedies begin in earnest now. Catherine brews teas from raspberry leaves, claiming they will strengthen the womb for labor. The tea tastes of grass and bitterness, but Marguerite drinks it dutifully, grateful for any action she can take to influence her fate. She chews fennel seeds to ease digestion and prevent the nausea that still strikes without warning. She rubs oil infused with lavender on her stretched belly, hoping to prevent the red marks that scar so many women after childbirth. But for every remedy that might help, there are a dozen more that are useless or even dangerous. Catherine brings powdered unicorn horn, actually ground narwhal tusk, though no one in the village knows this, that supposedly strengthens women in labor. She mixes potions containing mercury and lead, believing these heavy metals will balance the humors and ensure an easy birth. She burns strange resins and makes Marguerite breathe the smoke, convinced that certain scents can influence the baby's position in the womb. The other village women contribute their own knowledge to this growing collection of birthing lore. Agnes the baker brings bread baked with special herbs that supposedly prevent excessive bleeding. Mary from the mill shares a poultice made from spider webs and egg whites that she swears will heal any tears in the birth passage. Even the younger women, those who have not yet borne children themselves, offer advice gleaned from watching their mothers and sisters navigate pregnancy and birth. Some of this accumulated wisdom is genuinely helpful. The women understand, through generations of observation, that certain positions make labor easier. They know that walking can help a slow birth progress, and that massage can ease some of the pain. They have learned which herbs genuinely help with bleeding and which can stimulate contractions when labor stalls. The women also prepare for darker possibilities. They know that not all births end in joy, that sometimes the choice must be made between saving the mother or the child. In such cases, church doctrine is clear. The child's soul takes precedence over the mother's life. If the baby can be delivered and baptized, even at the cost of the mother's death, that is considered the moral choice. Marguerite tries not to think about this possibility, but it haunts her dreams like a shadow at the edge of vision. As her belly grows enormous and her discomfort increases, Marguerite finds herself caught between gratitude for this community of women and frustration with their endless, often contradictory advice. Every movement she makes is observed and interpreted. Every complaint is met with a dozen different suggested remedies. Every sign and symptom becomes fodder for debate among the self-appointed experts who surround her. "You're carrying wide. Definitely twins," pronounces one woman, despite having no evidence beyond the size of Marguerite's belly. "My sister carried just like that, and she had 2 boys." "Nonsense," argues another. "Wide means girl. Boys make you carry narrow and high. And look at her face. See how it's fuller. That's the daughter stealing her mother's beauty." These pronouncements, delivered with absolute certainty, create a constant buzz of speculation and prediction that follows Marguerite wherever she goes. She becomes less a person than a walking mystery to be solved, a puzzle whose answer will only be revealed in the drama of birth itself. The waiting becomes almost unbearable as her due time approaches. Every twinge in her belly might signal the beginning of labor. Every tightening of her womb could be the start of the contractions that will either deliver her child safely or carry her to her grave. She finds herself holding her breath, listening to her body with the intensity of a hunter listening for approaching prey. At night, she lies awake, feeling the baby move restlessly within her, as if it too grows impatient with the confinement of the womb. Sometimes she talks to it in whispers, promising to be a good mother if it will only come safely into the world. Sometimes she sings the lullabies her own mother sang to her, hoping the familiar melodies will soothe them both through these final, anxious weeks.
The seasons turn, and with them Marguerite's pregnancy approaches its climax. Soon, very soon, all the preparation and worry and wisdom will be put to the test. The accumulated knowledge of generations of women will either prove sufficient to guide her safely through childbirth, or it will fail her, as it has failed so many others. For now, she can only wait, surrounded by the whispered wisdom of women who understand her burden because they have carried it themselves, and try to find strength in their shared experience of this most fundamental and most dangerous of human experiences. It begins on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when the apple trees are heavy with white blossoms and the air carries the green scent of new growth. Marguerite wakes before dawn with a strange sensation in her belly, not pain exactly, but a tightening that seems to begin in her lower back and wrap around her sides like an invisible belt being slowly cinched tight. She lies still in the darkness beside her sleeping husband, trying to decide if this is the beginning of her labor or simply another of the false alarms that have troubled her sleep for weeks. The sensation fades, and she begins to drift back towards sleep when it comes again, stronger this time, lasting longer. By the third contraction she knows with the certainty that comes from deep within her body that her time has finally arrived. William stirs as she shifts restlessly beside him, then comes fully awake as she grips his arm during another contraction.
His face in the dim pre-dawn light shows the peculiar mixture of excitement and terror that marks all men when confronted with the reality of birth, joy at the approaching arrival of his child, fear at the knowledge that he is about to become either a father or a widower, perhaps both. "All fetch Catherine," he says, pulling on his clothes with hands that shake slightly. "And your mother, and who else?" "Agnes," Marguerite manages between contractions. "And Mary, if she can come. But quickly, William, this baby doesn't want to wait."
He disappears into the growing dawn, leaving Marguerite alone with the increasing intensity of her labour. The contractions come more frequently now, each one stronger than the last, each one bringing with it a wave of sensation unlike anything she has ever experienced. It is not simply pain, though there is pain, growing sharper and more demanding with each wave, but something deeper and more primal, as if her body has been taken over by forces beyond her control or understanding. She tries to remember the advice the women have given her about managing labour pain. Breathe deeply and slowly. Walk if you can. Find a comfortable position and try to relax between contractions. But as the morning progresses and the pains intensify, she discovers that all the advice in the world cannot prepare you for the reality of birth. This is something that cannot be managed or controlled. This is something that must be endured. Catherine arrives first, her leather satchel in one hand and a bundle of clean rags in the other. She takes one look at Marguerite, bent over and panting through another contraction, and nods with satisfaction. "Good strong labour," she pronounces, as if commenting on the weather. "Baby wants to come quick. That's usually better than slow." She begins to transform the small cottage into a birthing chamber, hanging extra blankets over the windows to ensure privacy, building up the fire to heat water, spreading clean straw on the floor where it might be needed. Her movements are efficient and practiced. She has done this dozens of times before, guided other women through this passage from pregnancy to motherhood or death. Marguerite's mother arrives next, her face creased with worry and love in equal measure. She has buried 3 children of her own and knows better than most how quickly joy can turn to sorrow in the birthing chamber. But she kisses her daughter's sweaty forehead and takes her hands, offering the comfort of presence, if not the promise of safety.
"You're strong," she whispers, "stronger than you know. Women in our family have always been good birthers. Your grandmother bore 8 children and lived to hold her great-grandchildren. You have that same strength in you." As the day wears on, the cottage fills with women. Agnes comes from the bakery, her hands still dusted with flour. Mary arrives from the mill, bringing news that the priest has been alerted and will come quickly if needed. Even some of the younger wives appear, drawn by the universal female need to witness and support the mystery of birth. They create a circle of feminine energy around Marguerite, taking turns holding her hands during contractions, massaging her back when the pain seems unbearable, offering sips of herbal tea and words of encouragement. Their presence transforms what could be a lonely, terrifying experience into something communal and shared, a ritual that connects Marguerite to the endless chain of women who have laboured and birthed since the beginning of time. But as the hours pass and the contractions grow stronger, more demanding, Marguerite begins to understand why so many women die in childbirth. This is not simply a natural process unfolding according to God's plan. This is a battle being fought within her own body, and she is both the battlefield and one of the combatants. The pain when it peaks during each contraction is unlike anything she could have imagined. It is not the sharp, localized pain of an injury or the dull ache of illness. It is something that takes over her entire being, that wipes away every thought except the need to survive the next wave, and the next, and the next. Between contractions, she gasps and recovers, gathering strength for the next assault. During contractions, she enters a state that is almost beyond consciousness, where nothing exists except the overwhelming need to push, to open, to bring this child into the world. Catherine examines her periodically, her rough hands probing areas that would normally be private and untouchable.
There is no modesty in the birthing chamber, no shame about bodies and their functions. Survival trumps propriety every time.
"Baby's coming down well," Catherine reports after one such examination. "Head's in the right position, won't be much longer now." But not much longer in birthing time bears no relation to normal measurements of duration. Marguerite labours through the afternoon and into the evening, each hour bringing new levels of exhaustion and pain. She discovers muscles she never knew she had, as her body works to push the baby down and out. She learns that birth is not a passive process, but the hardest physical work she will ever do, requiring strength and endurance she didn't know she possessed. As darkness falls and the contractions reach their peak intensity, Marguerite finds herself entering an altered state of consciousness. The world beyond her labouring body fades away. The voices of the women around her become distant murmurs. All of reality contracts to the elemental struggle taking place within her womb as her child fights to be born and she fights to birth it safely. She understands now why birth is called labour. This is work in its most fundamental form, the work of creation itself. Her body has become a vessel for forces larger than herself, and she can only surrender to the process and trust that nature and God and her own strength will see her through to the other side. The birthing stool is brought out as Catherine declares that the time for pushing has arrived. Marguerite positions herself on the U-shaped seat, gravity now working with her contractions to bring the baby down. The women gather closer, their faces illuminated by candlelight, their voices joining in encouragement and prayer. "I can see the head," Catherine announces, and for the first time in hours, excitement overcomes exhaustion in Marguerite's awareness. After all these months of carrying this child, after all these hours of labour, she is finally about to meet the little person who has shared her body and her life. But even now, at the moment of triumph, danger lurks. The baby's head crowns, stretching Marguerite's body to its limits, bringing pain so intense she nearly loses consciousness. She bears down with everything she has, feeling something give way inside her, something tear, hoping it is nothing vital. Then, in a rush of fluid and blood and overwhelming relief, the baby slides free. Catherine catches it expertly, her practiced hands guiding the slippery infant safely into the world. For a moment that seems to last forever, there is absolute silence in the room as everyone waits to see if this new life will draw breath. Then, like a miracle, the baby cries, a strong, lusty wail that fills the cottage and brings tears to every eye present. It is a sound more beautiful than any music, more precious than any treasure. It is the sound of successful birth, of life triumphant over the ever-present possibility of death. "A son," Catherine announces, holding up the red, wrinkled infant for all to see. "A fine, strong son." Marguerite collapses back against her mother's supporting arms, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief and joy so intense it feels almost like pain. She has done it. She has brought new life safely into the world. She has survived the most dangerous journey a woman can take and emerged victorious on the other side. But even in this moment of triumph, the spectre of mortality has not entirely departed. The placenta must still be delivered, and this too can be dangerous if complications arise. Marguerite's bleeding must be monitored to ensure it stays within normal bounds. The baby must be examined to make sure all is well, must be cleaned and warmed and given to its mother to nurse. Catherine works with quiet efficiency, massaging Marguerite's belly to help expel the afterbirth. When it comes, she examines it carefully by candlelight, looking for signs that it delivered completely. A retained fragment could mean infection, fever, death in the days to come. She nods with satisfaction. It appears whole and healthy. The baby is wiped clean with soft cloths and wrapped in swaddling bands that will keep its limbs straight and strong.
Its eyes are bright and alert, its cry strong and demanding. It roots eagerly when placed at its mother's breast, latching on with the instinctive hunger of new life.
As Marguerite holds her son for the first time, feeling his weight solid and warm against her chest, she understands that she has crossed a threshold from which there is no return. She is no longer the young woman who felt that first flutter of life 9 months ago. She is a mother now, bound to this small person by ties stronger than blood, deeper than love. Her body may heal from the trauma of birth, but her heart will never again belong entirely to herself. The women begin to clean up the birthing chamber, gathering the soiled straw in cloths, banking the fire for the night. They move quietly now, their voices hushed with the reverence that always follows successful birth. A new soul has entered the world, and the mystery of creation has once again revealed itself in all its terrible, beautiful power. William is finally allowed to enter, his face a study in wonder and relief as he looks upon his wife and son. He approaches hesitantly, as if afraid his heavy boots and calloused hands might somehow damage this miraculous scene. When he finally reaches out to touch his child's tiny fist, his eyes fill with tears he doesn't bother to hide. "He's perfect," he whispers, and in his voice is all the love and hope and desperate gratitude of a man who has just received the greatest gift imaginable, a living child and a wife who survived to hold him. The night deepens around the small cottage as mother and child rest together. The immediate danger has passed, but other perils lie ahead. The next few days will tell whether infection takes hold, whether Marguerite's body heals properly from the trauma of birth. The coming weeks will reveal whether the baby thrives or falls victim to any of the countless ailments that steal infants in their first months of life. But for now, in this moment suspended between what was and what will be, there is only peace. The sound of gentle breathing, the warmth of the dying fire, the soft whisper of spring wind through the apple blossoms outside. Life has triumphed once again over the forces that would end it, and in a world where such victories can never be taken for granted, that is miracle enough.
In the days that follow her son's birth, Marguerite discovers that surviving childbirth is only the beginning of her trials. The baby, whom they name Thomas, after William's father, proves to be a demanding master whose needs brook no compromise, no delay, no consideration for her mother's exhaustion or recovery. Her body, traumatized by the birth process, begins the slow work of healing. The tears in her tender flesh sting with every movement, every attempt to sit or walk. Catherine has sewn the worst of them with fine thread made from sheep's gut, but infection is an ever-present danger. She bathes the wounds with warm water steeped in comfrey and tries to keep them clean. But cleanliness in the medieval world is a relative concept at best. The bleeding continues for days, sometimes heavy enough to soak through the thick paths of moss and cloth she wears. This, too, is watched carefully by the women who attend her. Too much bleeding could mean death. Too little could signal that poisoned matter remains inside her body. Every aspect of her recovery is scrutinized and interpreted according to the accumulated wisdom of generations. But it is the baby's constant needs that dominate every hour of her existence. Thomas nurses frequently, sometimes every hour or two, leaving Marguerite's breasts sore and cracked. In this world without bottles or formula, she is his only source of nourishment, bound to him by the relentless demands of his hunger. She learns to sleep sitting up, the baby in her arms, ready to feed him at the first sign of restlessness. The other women warn her about the dangers of insufficient milk. Some mothers simply cannot produce enough to keep their babies alive, and there are few alternatives in a world without refrigeration, without knowledge of proper nutrition, without access to the milk of other species that might substitute for human breast milk. Wet nurses exist, but they are luxuries for the wealthy. A peasant woman whose milk fails must watch her child slowly starve, or seek the desperate remedies offered by wise women, herbs and potions that may help or may poison, prayers and charms that offer hope
but no guarantees.
Marguerite's milk comes in abundance, but this brings its own problems. Her breasts become painfully engorged, hot and hard as stones. The baby's eager suckling provides some relief, but between feedings she suffers constantly. Catherine brings poultices of cabbage leaves to draw out the heat and swelling, and shows her how to express excess milk by hand, a skill that would have been unthinkable for a maiden to possess, but becomes essential knowledge for a nursing mother. Sleep becomes a distant memory, something that belongs to her previous life before motherhood. Thomas follows no schedule except his own internal rhythms, waking to nurse at all hours of the day and night. Even when he sleeps, Marguerite finds herself lying awake, listening to his breathing, alert to any change that might signal illness or distress. The constant vigilance is exhausting, but in a world where infant death is common, no mother dares relax her guard. The baby's bodily functions become the subject of intense scrutiny and discussion among the village women. The color and consistency of his waist, the frequency of his urination, the sounds he makes while sleeping, all are analyzed for signs of health or illness. Marguerite learns to read these signs like a physician reading symptoms, understanding that changes in any of these basic functions could herald the beginning of fatal illness. She discovers that new motherhood in the medieval world is a profoundly social experience. The other women visit frequently, bringing food and advice in equal measure. They examine the baby with the expertise of those who have survived multiple pregnancies and child-rearing experiences. They share stories of their own children, those who lived and those who didn't, those who thrived and those who struggled. These stories serve multiple purposes. They normalize the difficulties Marguerite faces, assuring her that every mother struggles with exhaustion, sore breasts, and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. But they also serve as warnings, reminders of how quickly infant health can change, how suddenly a thriving baby can sicken and die. Every fever, every change in appetite, every unusual cry could be the beginning of the end.
The rituals surrounding newborn care are numerous and complex. Thomas must be baptized within days of his birth to ensure his soul's salvation should he die suddenly. The ceremony requires godparents, special garments, holy water blessed by the priest. It is both a celebration of new life and an insurance policy against eternal damnation, a hedge against the very real possibility that this precious child might not survive to see his first birthday. His care involves an intricate system of swaddling that keeps his limbs straight and supposedly promotes proper growth. He is wrapped tightly in long strips of linen from neck to toe, his arms bound at his sides, his legs held straight and together. This swaddling is changed periodically, but the baby spends most of his early weeks bound like a small mummy, able to move only his head and fingers. The reasoning behind this practice is both practical and superstitious. Tightly swaddled babies are easier to carry and less likely to scratch themselves with their tiny fingernails. But the medieval world also believes that unrestricted movement could cause deformities, that babies' soft bones and muscles need external support to develop properly. The swaddling is meant to ensure that Thomas grows up straight-limbed and strong, not crooked or weak. Margaret's own recovery proceeds slowly and with constant uncertainty. The wise women examine her regularly, feeling her belly to ensure it returns to its normal size, checking her bleeding to make sure it gradually decreases. They bring her special foods meant to restore her strength,
broths made from bones, ale with eggs mixed in, bread soaked in wine. But nutrition in the medieval world is more art than science, and what helps one woman may do nothing for another. Her emotional state fluctuates wildly as her body tries to adjust to the dramatic changes brought by birth and motherhood. One moment she feels overwhelmed with love for her son, marveling at his perfect tiny fingernails, his sweet milky scent, the way he grasps her finger with surprising strength. The next moment she finds herself crying for no apparent reason, mourning the loss of her previous life, terrified by the enormity of the responsibility she now carries.
These emotional swings are accepted as normal by the other women, who recognize them as part of the natural process of becoming a mother. They offer comfort and reassurance, sharing their own memories of early motherhood's difficulties, but they also watch carefully for signs of the deeper melancholy that sometimes strikes new mothers, a darkness of spirit that can prevent a woman from caring properly for her child and may even lead her to harm herself or the baby. The seasonal cycle continues around Marguerite's small world of recovery and new motherhood. Spring advances towards summer, bringing longer days and warmer weather that makes it easier to keep the baby comfortable. But with warmth also come new dangers, insects that might bite or sting the vulnerable infant, spoiled food that could poison mother's milk, diseases that spread more easily in warm weather. Every aspect of daily life must now be filtered through the lens of the baby's needs and vulnerabilities. The cottage must be kept warm but not too warm, clean but not disturbed by excessive activity. Visitors must be healthy and blessed by the priest. Food must be carefully chosen and prepared to ensure the mother's milk remains pure and nourishing. As the weeks pass and Thomas begins to show signs of thriving, gaining weight, staying awake for longer periods, responding to voices and faces, Marguerite allows herself to hope that he might be one of the fortunate ones who survive infancy. But she also knows that danger is never far away. Illness can strike without warning. Accidents happen in an instant. The healthy baby nursing at her breast today could be gone tomorrow, claimed by any of the countless perils that stalk young children in this uncertain world. For now, she focuses on the immediate needs of each day, each feeding, each small milestone in her son's development. She learns to find joy in the simple fact of his continued existence, in the weight of his warm body against her chest, in the sound of his breathing beside her in the night. These small pleasures must sustain her through the exhaustion and worry, the physical discomfort and emotional turbulence of early motherhood. The ancient rhythm of women's lives continues: birth, nursing, weaning, pregnancy, birth again, an endless cycle that has shaped female existence since the beginning of time. Marguerite has joined this dance, and though she cannot see the steps that lie ahead, she moves to its music one day at a time, carrying her son safely through each moment as it comes, hoping that love and care and divine providence will be enough to see them both through to whatever future awaits.
Summer deepens around the small cottage where Marguerite tends her growing son, but even as Thomas begins to smile and reach for the dancing dust motes in shafts of sunlight, the spectre of infant mortality haunts every peaceful moment. In this world, where 1 child in 3 will not live to see their 5th birthday, every mother walks a tightrope between hope and heartbreak, love and the constant preparation for loss. Marguerite learns this harsh arithmetic not through statistics, but through the lived experience of her community. Young Elizabeth, the cooper's wife, loses her daughter to a fever that burns through the baby's tiny body in 3 days, leaving behind only a small grave in the churchyard and a mother whose milk continues to flow for a child who will never nurse again. Old Sarah, who's bearing 5 of her 7 children, stops by one afternoon to hold Thomas and whisper prayers over his sleeping form, not because she expects harm to come to him, but because she knows how quickly fortune can change. The catalogue of childhood dangers reads like a medieval bestiary of death. fevers that spike without warning, turning rosy cheeks pale and bright eyes dull in a matter of hours. The sweating sickness that can sweep through entire villages, claiming the young and healthy along with the old and weak. The flux that empties tiny bowels until there is nothing left but skin stretched over fragile bones. The whooping cough that makes breathing impossible. The scarlet fever that burns through communities like wildfire. The mysterious wasting diseases that steal appetite and strength until life simply fades away. Even the act of feeding, so essential to survival, carries its own perils. Marguerite's breasts, once a source of pride in their ability to nourish her son, become a constant source of worry. Is her milk too thin, too thick, too little, too much? The wise women examine drops of it on their fingers, tasting and analyzing it like vintners evaluating wine. Too sweet might mean the mother has fever. Too thin might indicate poor nutrition. Too scanty could mean the baby will starve despite her mother's presence.
And if a mother's milk fails entirely, through illness, exhaustion, or the mysterious workings of bodies that follow no predictable rules, the alternatives are grim. Goat's milk, if available, must be diluted and sweetened, fed from horns or crude spoons, to babies whose digestive systems are not designed for anything but human breast milk. Many infants sicken and die on such substitutes. Wet nurses, when they can be found and afforded, bring their own risks. What if they are diseased, or their own diet is poor, or their milk is contaminated by the humours of their temperament? The swaddling that keeps Thomas's limbs straight also creates new dangers. Bound so tightly for so many hours each day, his skin grows red and raw with the band's chafe. The cloths that should keep him clean become breeding grounds for the rashes and sores that can quickly turn septic in an age without understanding of bacterial infection. Marguerite learns to change his wrappings frequently, to examine every inch of his skin for signs of trouble, to treat the smallest irritation with the seriousness of a mortal threat. Sleep, already fragmented by the demands of nursing, becomes even more elusive as Marguerite develops the hypervigilance that marks mothers in dangerous times. She wakes at the slightest change in Thomas's breathing, at any sound that seems different from his usual sleeping noises. She learns to detect the subtle signs of illness before they become obvious. A slight warmth to his forehead, a change in the smell of his breath, a restlessness that seems different from ordinary fussiness. The other mothers share their techniques for detecting and treating childhood ailments. They teach her to feel for swollen glands in her neck, to check the color of her gums and the whites of her eyes, to monitor the fontanelle on top of her head for signs of dehydration or fever. Their knowledge, passed down through generations of women who have fought to keep their children alive, becomes her arsenal in the war against infant mortality.
But even armed with this collective wisdom, Marguerite knows that much depends on forces beyond her control. The weather, which can bring killing frosts in late spring, or disease-bearing humidity in summer. The harvest, which determines whether there will be enough food to keep nursing mothers healthy and productive. The political situation, which can bring soldiers and violence and disruption to communities where children are already vulnerable. She watches Thomas with the intensity of a guard protecting a treasure, noting every change in his behavior, every milestone in his development. When he begins to hold his head steady, she feels a flutter of triumph. Strong neck muscles are a sign of healthy growth. When he starts to make cooing sounds in response to her voice, she sees evidence that his mind is developing properly. Each small achievement is not just a joy, but a victory against the odds. The village church fills regularly with small coffins, their presence a constant reminder of the precarious nature of young life. Marguerite attends these funeral masses with Thomas clutched tightly in her arms, whispering prayers of gratitude that it is not her child being lowered into the earth, while simultaneously begging divine protection against the day when it might be. The sight of other mothers, hollow-eyed with grief, standing beside graves too small to contain their sorrow, haunts her dreams and shadows her waking hours. Yet life continues its relentless forward motion, even in the face of such losses. The seasons turn, crops grow and are harvested, new babies are born to replace those who have died. The community adapts to each tragedy with the resilience born of necessity, mourning the dead while protecting the living, burying the lost while celebrating the survivors. Thomas grows despite the dangers that surround him, his body filling out his swaddling clothes, his eyes beginning to track movement and recognize faces. He develops the endearing habit of grasping Marguerite's finger while he nurses, his tiny fist holding on with the determination of someone who understands on some instinctive level that life is precious and must be fought for.
As autumn approaches, and Thomas survives his first changes of season, Marguerite allows herself the cautious hope that he might be among the fortunate ones who live to see their first birthday. But she also knows that each stage of childhood brings new perils. Weaning, when it comes, will introduce new possibilities for illness and malnutrition. Learning to walk will bring new opportunities for accidents and injuries. Even surviving infancy provides no guarantee against the diseases and mishaps that can claim children at any age. For now, she holds them close and counts each day as a gift, each peaceful night as a blessing, each sign of healthy growth as a small miracle. The love she feels for him is fierce and protective, tempered by the knowledge that in this world a mother's heart must be strong enough to endure the possibility of loss, even as it opens completely to the reality of love. The long shadow of infant mortality touches every aspect of medieval motherhood, shaping how women love their children, how communities support young families, how societies organize themselves around the central task of ensuring that enough children survive to carry life forward into the next generation. It is a shadow that makes every laugh precious, every milestone significant, every peaceful moment a treasure to be stored against the uncertain future that lies ahead. As winter approaches once again, and Thomas grows stronger with each passing day, Marguerite finds herself changed in ways she could never have imagined when she first felt that flutter of life beneath her palm. The young woman who began this journey 9 months ago was shaped by hope and fear in equal measure. The mother who emerges from the crucible of medieval pregnancy and childbirth carries different knowledge now, deeper, harder won, tempered by the fire of experience. She understands now why the village women spoke in whispers about pregnancy, why their eyes held shadows even when they smiled at her growing belly. She comprehends the weight of the ancient ritual that transforms maidens into mothers, the price paid in blood and pain and sleepless nights for the privilege of bringing new life into the world. She has joined the ranks of women who know in their bones and in their hearts what it truly means to create and nurture life when death walks so closely beside every cradle.
The cottage where Thomas was born holds different energy now. The walls that witnessed her labor seem to remember the sounds of pain and triumph, the prayers whispered in darkness, the first cry that announced his safe arrival.
The hearth where water was heated for his birth continues to warm the space where he grows and learns and discovers the world one small wonder at a time. This place has become sacred through the simple act of successful birth, marked forever by the miracle of survival in a world where such miracles could never be taken for granted. Outside, the seasons continue their eternal dance, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. The apple trees that bloomed during Thomas's birth are heavy now with fruit that will feed the village through the winter months. The fields yield their harvest to tables where families gather, including some with empty chairs where children once sat, and others blessed with new voices added to the evening prayers. In the churchyard, small graves rest beneath the changing leaves, silent testimony to the children who did not survive their first winters, their first summers, their first encounters with the countless perils that stalked young life in medieval times. Their mothers continue to tend these tiny plots, bringing flowers in spring, sweeping away autumn leaves, whispering names that must not be forgotten, even though the children who bore them have returned to dust. But beside these graves, in the cottage and throughout the village, other children thrive and grow. They take their first steps on legs that prove strong enough to carry them. They speak their first words in voices that will sing lullabies to their own children someday. They survive the dangerous passage from birth to childhood, proving that love and care and vigilance and luck can sometimes triumph over the forces that would end young lives before they truly begin. Marguerite carries Thomas through the village now with the quiet confidence of a mother who has learned to read her child's needs, who has survived the first crucial months of motherhood, who has found her place in the community of women who understand the weight of maternal responsibility. Her body has healed from the trauma of birth, though it bears the permanent marks of her transformation, the softened belly that once held her son, the breasts that continue to nourish him, the hands that have learned the precise pressure needed to soothe a crying infant.
The wise women nod their approval when they see her. Old Catherine, who guided her through labor with hands that had delivered countless babies, smiles when Thomas grasps her gnarled finger with his tiny fist. The other mothers share the knowing looks of veterans who have fought the same battles, who understand the particular exhaustion and joy that mark successful early motherhood. As the light fades and evening settles over the village, Marguerite sits by her own hearth with Thomas nursing quietly at her breast. The familiar weight of him against her body, the gentle tug of his suckling, the soft sounds of his breathing. These simple sensations connect her to the endless chain of mothers who have held their children close and wondered at the mystery of life continuing despite all the forces arrayed against it. She thinks sometimes of the women who came before her, her own mother and grandmother, the countless generations of mothers who faced the same fears and joys, who walked the same treacherous path from pregnancy through childbirth to the daily vigilance of keeping small children alive. Their stories live on in the advice passed down through generations, in the remedies tried and tested by countless women, in the quiet strength that flows from mother to daughter like an underground river. And she thinks of the women who will come after her, Thomas's future wife perhaps, should he live to marry, and the daughters-in-laws who might someday look to her for the wisdom she is still acquiring. She imagines herself as the village-wise woman, her hair grey and her hands marked by decades of tending children, offering the same guidance and comfort that Catherine provides now. The fire burns low as night deepens around the cottage. Thomas sleeps peacefully in his mother's arms, his breathing steady and strong, his body warm and solid with the reality of survival. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new worries, new small joys to balance against the ever-present awareness of life's fragility. But tonight, mother and child rest together in the quiet sanctuary of home, surrounded by the invisible protection of love and hope and the hard-won knowledge that they have both survived the most dangerous journey of all.
In the distance, church bells mark the passing hours with their bronze voices, calling the faithful to evening prayers. The sound carries across the village and into the cottage where Marguerite holds her son,
a reminder that they are part of something larger than themselves, a community bound together by shared struggles and common hopes, by the universal human need to protect and nurture the young, by the ancient understanding that children are not just individual treasures, but the future itself made flesh. The story of medieval pregnancy ends not with grand conclusions or moral lessons, but with this simple scene, a mother and child together by firelight, having survived odds that claimed so many others, facing an uncertain future with the quiet courage that has always marked human existence. Their story is written in flesh and blood rather than ink and parchment, preserved not in chronicles or court records, but in the continuation of life itself, in the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next, in the eternal rhythm of birth and growth and hope that carries humanity forward through even the darkest times. And so the wheel of seasons turns, carrying us ever further from that distant world where pregnancy was a covenant with fate, where birth was a battle that not all mothers won, where the simple act of holding a living child was recognition of grace received and obstacles overcome. The cottage grows quiet. The fire settles into glowing coals. Mother and child sleep peacefully together, their breathing synchronized in the ancient rhythm of survival, their story joining the countless others that make up the vast ongoing narrative of human endurance and love. The night embraces them gently, as it has embraced mothers and children for countless centuries before, as it will continue to embrace them for all the centuries yet to come. In that embrace, all stories become one story. All mothers become one mother. All children become the precious, fragile hope that tomorrow will be kinder than today, that love will prove stronger than loss, that life will continue its miraculous dance despite all the shadows that threaten to end it. Sleep comes softly to the medieval world, carrying with it dreams of children who grow strong and mothers who live to see them thrive. Dreams of futures where the ancient fears that haunted pregnancy and childbirth will seem as distant as fairy tales. Dreams of a time when bringing new life into the world will be cause only for celebration, never for the complex mixture of joy and terror that marked motherhood in those long-ago days when women walked alone through the valley of shadows, carrying within themselves both the promise of tomorrow and the ever-present possibility of endings. But that time has not yet come, for now there is only this moment, this mother, this child, this quiet cottage where love has triumphed once again over all the forces that would diminish it. And perhaps, in the end, that is miracle enough.